Hey guys, Rominating Reaper here, and today I'm outside the cinema and I am running, not walking. Yep, I'm about to head in to see The Running Man. Really looking forward to this. Recently listened to the audiobook version, and so, I am really excited to see the book story actually translated for the screen this time. And it's Edgar Wright directing. Love all his films. So I have my fingers crossed this will be a good time. Hopefully this will deliver exactly the kind of slick, high energy action spectacle that he, so reliably delivers across all his films. But the only way to find out is to head in, get some snacks, and get seated for The Running Man. So yeah, I've got my popcorn here and a red frozen Fanta in line with the colours of the titular game show, ready for Edgar Wright's adaptation of this Richard Bachman story. So, The Running Man. I'm back from seeing it. This is of course directed by Edgar Wright, and co-written by him and Michael Bacall, who previously wrote Scott Pilgrim, so a little reunion. They're of course adapting the Stephen King novel, written under his pen name Richard Bachman. And this is not the first time this particular Bachman book has been adapted for the screen. There was of course the Arnold Schwarzenegger version back in the 80s, which was a pretty loose adaptation. And so obviously this one promised to be more faithful to the book, and given that the book has a lot of very, very interesting and quite timely themes, yeah, I had my fingers crossed that they would deliver on that. But does Wright deliver on his promise of a more book-accurate adaptation? Well, let's find out. So the film follows Ben Richards, who lives in the slums in Co-op City with his wife Sheila and young daughter Kathy, who is seriously ill. Due to Ben's blacklisted employment status, he is unable to afford proper medical care for Kathy, and so as a last-ditch effort, he heads to the network building to apply for one of their many game shows, and ends up being selected for their biggest one, The Running Man, in which he has to survive 30 days on the run with a group of brutal hunters on his tail at every turn. If he survives all 30 days, he gets a juicy reward of $1 billion new dollars. However, the stakes of the game only get bigger when Richards becomes an unexpected fan favourite. So it's worth noting that this is something Wright has wanted to do for quite a while now. He was asked on Twitter a few years back if he had the budget to remake any film, what would it be? He responded, Running Man. So clearly this is something of a passion project for him, and I have to say that the end result of that is possibly his weakest film yet. But in saying that, I still enjoyed it a lot, so it's clear that Wright at his weakest is better than a lot of other filmmakers at their best. So something I have to commend is just how faithful it is to the book's story. Like, obviously there are changes made, because, it's a film adaptation of a book, but it actually stuck pretty close to the actual story beats of the book, and for that I have to commend it. Like, it's, a hell of a lot closer than the Arnie film anyway. And of course, it has a prime vehicle to explore the pretty interesting social commentary of the book. Obviously, there's a pretty scathing critique of the TV era, of how the less fortunate are exploited, and that is turned into, spectacle to entertain the masses. We get these cutaways to these game shows where we see the vulnerable and poor getting hurt or killed, and people applauding it and cheering it on, contrasted with cutaways to a reality TV show where we see the most privileged, the most vapid people getting into petty squabbles over first world problems. And there's also a very interesting thing in here about how the media and TV is used as a propaganda tool. We see them like manipulating messages to sow division amongst the people, to turn their eyes away from the real enemy of the government. Obviously, all these messages are just as relevant and probably even more so now than they were when King first wrote the book. Now, it does take a little bit for that story to actually get going. Now, some of that is necessary to set up Ben's character, who's played here by Glenn Powell, who does a great job. Obviously, he's being positioned as one of the next big movie stars, and you can see why. He's very charismatic, has great screen presence, but he does a really great job of selling Ben's deeper burning anger at a system that has, tried to keep him down, tried to silence him. He's fantastic here. A compelling and grounded protagonist, well worth rooting for as he becomes a symbol of hope for the common man. Obviously, with that, compelling character setup, it does make that opening act worth sitting through, even if it does, again, take a bit to find its footing. But once the game starts, it really kicks into gear. As you can see, Edgar Wright clearly having a lot of fun directing the action spectacle, and there are some very fun set pieces here, including a scene where Ben has to make a daring escape wearing nothing but a towel, and a scene that is clearly a little bit reminiscent of Home Alone's iconic climax, but a little bit more violent. A little bit. And of course, that energy is backed with a very fun score from Stephen Price, who at this point is a Wright frequent collaborator. But even with how much fun you can tell Wright is having behind the camera, his directing is actually a lot more restrained than usual. And don't get me wrong, there are certainly hints of his usual style in there. There are like split diopter shots and dolly zooms, and some well-placed bits of humor and some soundtrack choices that are all just classically right. But for all those little flourishes, it's actually a lot more restrained than usual, and I think it works given the quite grim dystopia that the story is set in, and that is wonderfully brought to life. Great production design, and we get these like gritty, grimy slums, which are contrasted by the sleek, clean, almost soulless hallways of the network building. And of course, populating this bleak world is a very interesting and eclectic set of characters. Obviously, on the network side of things, we have Dan Killian, the Running Man's creator, who's played by Josh Brolin, who does a great job as this utterly smug, punchable character. We also have Lee Pace as Evan McCone, the chief hunter, who's this elusive presence that just radiates cool, but is also deep down kind of a tragic character. On the flip side of things, we have Michael Cera, another Scott Pilgrim reunion, playing Eldon Paracus, a fairly sympathetic rebel who takes on Ben's cause. We also have Katie O'Brien as Laughlin, another contestant on the show who actually bonds a bit with Ben over their mutual experiences living in the slums and trying to make a bit of money. We also have William H. Macy as Molly, a black market arms dealer and friend of Ben's who he initially turns to for disguises and weapons to evade the hunters, but you can see Molly's disapproval at this quite reckless plan to make money, and Macy does a good job of it. We also have Emilia Jones as Amelia Williams, a rich woman totally oblivious to what's actually going on until Ben hijacks her car. And she does do a pretty decent job at selling the anger of this woman who realizes she's being sold a lie. But of course, the scene stealer, far and away, is Coleman Domingo as the Running Man's host, Bobby Thompson, who brings just enough camp to really sell this larger-than-life TV presenter. He is wonderful, and it's quite funny that in back-to-back weekends, he has this and his role as the Cowardly Lion in Wicked for Good. I imagine he'll do a really good job at that, too. And yet, obviously, a lot of these characters do have quite small roles, but they really do serve their purpose in the story and for Ben's mission as a whole. And yet, despite all of this stuff that it's trying to pack into this near 2.25 hour runtime, it never feels like it's bloated or feels like it's dragging on. I think because of the propulsive nature of the thrill of the hunt, as it just consistently builds and builds that momentum throughout, right through to possibly the biggest change from the book, the ending. Now, if you've read the book, you'll know that the ending is pretty ballsy, and for a moment, I really thought they were actually building to do that, and I just as I had my hopes up, they cut away to something else. This clearly feels like a studio mandated thing to have a happier ending because, again, the book's ending is pretty bold. So it's a shame that they didn't fully commit, because they obviously do a great job with, all the other quite biting commentary of the book, but it feels like they kind of cut themselves short there in favor of a more conventional, happy ending that, again, just feels studio mandated and tacked on. Overall, The Running Man is a very entertaining, dark satire with a wonderfully grim dystopian setting and very entertaining action spectacle, carried along by a charismatic lead in Glenn Powell. Out of 10, The Running Man gets an 8. So, let me know down in the comments, have you seen The Running Man? What did you think of it? Have you read the book? What did you make of it as an adaptation? What did you make of it in comparison to the Schwarzenegger film? Let me know all that down in the comments. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're new. And don't forget to turn on post notifications so you don't miss an upload.